Yeah, I think it's going to be right around 20 minutes roughly.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want too long to just, essentially hit on the main things, stay focused on it. So that, I've rehearsed it many, many times. I've lost my I even rehearsed it 2 or 3 times this morning.
How much of a how many times do I need to prepare ahead of time? Like, and I don't feel like I've got a lot of things. I still got usually 2 or 3 times, right? So it's like, it'll be okay. It really will be. That's right. Well, you come down to it, and the fact that you actually talk. Sometimes you guys want to see things add more than what you're planning, or you end up bringing it even further less than so I feel like that's the rules are guiding me in that moment because typically what I do is right.
I don't want to get up here and
And you don't prepared. Straight to the point. I just figured you were taking to. Oh, no worries. I'll let it. Oh, yeah. So we're on the same track, right? Because I actually have You're not. Yeah. No. You're good. Hey, buddy. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Alan.
Dawn's giving me the cue. Means everybody needs to sit down. So good to see you all this morning. It feels like it's been forever since we've seen each other, but it's only been a week, right? That's what you get when you miss just even one time together. We're going to be in 2 Kings 11 and 12 this morning. We'll do a quick recap of 9 and 10 before we get there. And before we do that, we're going to go to God in prayer. So go ahead and bow with me at this time. Lord God above, you are wonderful and mighty. We've seen your action even this last week, and we know that you have such great strength and power and might. And Father, it goes beyond the natural world, but we understand how you are in control of everything. You provide us with the good things that we have around us. You give us those wonderful blessings, and you also teach us that you also are in charge of judgment. And so we need to be prepared for that time, and hopefully today in our studies we get a better glimpse of what we need to do and how those in the past have either done or have not done those things. Just help us be prepared and continue to guide us and direct us as we go through your word. It's in your Son Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. So, it's been gloomy for the last several days. Hopefully your mood this morning isn't gloomy, but I know that typically when I lived in the Northwest, we had a good 4 or 5, sometimes all the way up to 6 months worth of gloom. And trust me, it gets you down big time. So handling just a few days, hopefully it's not too bad. I saw the weather yesterday and it looked like maybe Tuesday we might have some sun. Maybe we might get it before then, but I'm excited for that. All right, our study in the looking at the kings, we're going to switch slightly this morning because we're going to look at a queen. We haven't looked at a queen yet so far, kind of a self-appointed queen, but give me some thought processes of kings that we've seen so far. Go back to some of the early discussions we had about Deuteronomy 17, looking at verses 14 through 20. What were some of those bigger topic items that we saw that God wanted them to do if they were going to follow their neighbors and have kings, right? What was that supposed to look like? What type of person were they supposed to be? Coming from what lineage? What group? What type of people?
From them and not a foreigner.
Yeah, from them, not a foreigner. Them being the Israelites, right? Okay. Let's also talk about, okay, what types of possessions were they supposed to have? What types of possessions? Or not have, yes. That's probably a better descriptive.
Not amass horses and chariots or gold and silver.
Yeah, which you would oftentimes have with possibly a king, right?
But with the purpose of not letting their heart drift away from God.
Ah, yeah. There's a bigger reason for that, right?
Distractions.
Distractions is what Mike says. Yeah. Can we say the same thing for ourselves? Maybe not gold and chariots and horses and things like that, but when you have a nation that is wealthier, you tend to gravitate towards those things because that's what's available. You have that available to you. So you tend to go towards those objects that do what? What do they do to you as a occupier?
We set our self-worth in them. That means I've arrived. That shows that I've accomplished things when I can amass things.
Yeah, they give you self-worth. What were you gonna?
What she said.
Okay, there you go. Good job. They present to you a thought process that, okay, maybe I'm better than other people, even though that may not be your thought process. There is that tendency to be that way. What else were they supposed to do? What were they supposed to write down? Yeah, the law. The understanding of what it was to be a person of God. Not just a person of God, but a leader of God's people. And what were they supposed to do with that? Throw it out
Take it with them.
the window? Yeah. Okay. So it's not uncommon for that to be given to anybody else to take it with them. What's Deuteronomy chapter 6 talk about? You're supposed to do what with it?
Meditate on it every day.
Yeah. So even though you're a king, it doesn't go any different than if you're a regular person, right? So that brings it back home to us again, the types of things that we need to consider. We're going to get into that because I want to come back to that a little bit later in our study this morning.
the other thing, go back to what April was saying, or similar to what she was saying, the fact that they were supposed to write it and take it with them was so that they would not raise themselves above their brothers. They would not think themselves better than those around them.
And it's interesting because what is it that they're wanting to do with a king?
Raise them up.
To be like their neighbors, right? Now I understand that's a different neighbor, it's another nation, but we can have the same tendencies. We want to be like other nations. We want to be like our neighbors. We like, our term today is we want to be like the Joneses, right? Oftentimes. All right. Chapter 9, chapter 10, I want to go through them a little bit, just as a quick review for us, to kind of bring us up to where we are right now. Not necessarily go into a lot of depth with that, but I know some of us have been out, been traveling, and some of the discussions that we had a week ago were about Jehu. And he was a king that you saw a twofold part of him. He did a lot of good, but he did a lot that wasn't good. So you see some kind of a mixed bag with him, is what I would say. But I would say more on the negative side. That's just my personal opinion. King of Israel, so the northern, okay? What were some of the things that he initially did in chapter 9? And we kind of see a carryover of that in chapter 10. What was his MO, if you will?
Well, his accomplishment was that he overthrew Ahab and Jezebel and their lineage.
Yeah.
So he went in and destroyed that line of kings.
Wiped them out, right?
And kind of ended the rule of the kings who were really leaning into the worship of Baal. And did that at Elisha's instruction.
Yep.
And so that was a really good thing that he and followed that instruction.
And it's interesting that you point that out because we don't really start to see, or don't have Elisha been brought up a whole lot more after this, right? He's kind of, his role was really in that interim period after Elijah. Jehu gets rid of not only the northern king, but he also gets rid of the southern king too, right? So Ahaziah, I don't know how you say his name, I always struggle with it, is the other king that you get rid of. One of the problems that I have, and I don't know if you have this same problem, but as I go through the kings, I always struggle with the ones that have similar or the same names. It's like, okay, which ones are we talking about, right? Are you talking about the the northern kingdom? You're talking about the southern kingdom, right? Israel or Judah? So I'm going to try to help us with that today because I feel as though 11 especially, you start to, okay, who's related to who and what is, like, I tried to map it out myself, and then I wanted to see, did others have the same thought process that I did as I'm going through this? So we'll get to that in just a moment. But he gets rid of, it even goes kind of a bigger picture. It's some of Omri's lineage, which is Ahab, and Jezebel is obviously married to Ahab. We know that they were wicked in their ways. You know, you see glimpses of Ahab's heart that maybe he actually had a heart, but there wasn't much of that. We start to see he get rid of, in chapter 10, a lot of Ahab's family, right? His sons. How many sons did he have? Just a couple, right? 70. Didn't even talk about the daughters in there. That's a lot of kids, you know. I think of Solomon and the masses of people in his lineage, right? Well, Ahab was pretty prolific as well. So Jehu really is trying to change the scene. Is that a self-promoting purpose? What would you say? Do you see him as I'm trying to be better than everybody else? Get rid of everybody else to show that I don't have others to come against me, right? What do you see?
It kind of made me think of the New Testament and being lukewarm. I'm doing it, but I'm not fully committed because it could be a bunch of different reasons. It could be
Sure.
personally, it could be fear, it could be taking a stand, but I don't want to make everybody mad. I think there could be a lot of different options, but you see all these things like, okay, look, last Sunday it made me think of, a cleansing, a purge.
Right.
But
Yeah.
we didn't quite get there.
Yeah.
Why? It's the same things we can do. I'm doing it, and then I either get tired, I get complacent, and I don't truly put God in my life where He needs to be.
Yeah. I don't follow through the whole way. I have lots of good intentions. And sometimes my good intentions is all that it gets me. If I don't take them any farther than that. And that kind of makes me think of what April had just mentioned. Sometimes I want tos, don't follow up. There's no follow-up to that. And I have to be reminded, and sometimes Brenda has to remind me, oh, by the way, this is what we intended to do, right? I've been struggling lately with getting back on a regular pattern with Elijah to study with him at night. We did that very well with the younger two, but now there's the third one, and for some reason, I'm struggling more with that. And he's struggling. You can see it. She sees it a ton, right? Because she's with him every day in the daytime, the majority of the time. And so, you have to reflect. And sometimes that reflection needs to be a reminder reflection too. Somebody next to you. John, did you have something?
Yeah, so it's kind of neat to see these chapters really talk about purge. But I also noticed there was a point where it said when they were at peace. It didn't say they had changed habits, focus. I think that's, at least for me, struggle a lot of times. I can purge something, I can try to get something in my life, but those are habits that I've got, or things from basically my family's the way they raised me. And I can help do something to replace that and really overcome that struggle. So when I saw that verse where it said they were at peace, but didn't really say, okay, what are they doing differently to make sure they don't go back?
Yeah.
That's the part that is missing.
What's the
I know
replacement?
For me personally, I realized that. It just kind of hit me when I read that. So it's great to go through a purge, get rid of the old, but that old include a lot of habits, a lot of culture that they have gotten into that even if they don't have the bills, they're still not refocused.
Very good. Appreciate all of that insight. Okay, let's take a look at 11. Athaliah is a new person that we see. We haven't seen her before. Kind of give me a little bit of background on who she is. And Don, you can bring up a slide for this one. Who's Athaliah? This kind of gives you an idea of who she is. This is what I kind of came up with, and there were others that had this thought process too, of kind of who's connected to who. And what I want to show you here is what I was noticing is that there's overlap between the northern and the southern kingdoms. Okay? there had been a lot of division, but we've started to see some of that break down a little bit. They're starting to be a little bit more united. And so now you're starting to see more of marriages between family members of the two groups. I don't ever remember that in the studies that I had gone through previous of the Kings. And you may take it differently, but this is kind of where I've even got it on my paper here, is how I thought things were connected, and it kind of lines up with this too. So it may be right, it may not be exactly right, but this at least gives us a framework of some of the people that we're going to be talking about today. So if you disagree with that, that's okay. I'm okay with that. Because I can't say that 100% I'm true to this. But this is kind of what I see. Athaliah is kind of an in-between person. She ends up marrying Jehoram, is what it seems to be, based on what we piece together here. We have, and I don't, my version, and I looked at several other versions, they have it a little bit different than, so you see the sister that kind of comes down to the side. In my version, in verse 2 of chapter 11, says Jehosheba, right? So it's slightly different there. You will also see sometimes that, like Joash, that we will talk about here in a little bit, he's referred differently as well. So Jehoash is like a nickname that he would be given. So just want to kind of help you guys, because it helps me to kind of go through who's related to who, and how did that person, and like connecting the dots, right? If it helps you, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too. What's the scenario that we start out with in chapter 11? Athaliah's done what? What has she seen? What has she witnessed? Dead son. What was his name? Ahaziah, right? One of the Ahaziahs that is mentioned. So, looking at the chart, which side would that be on? Which Ahaziah would that be on?
Judah.
Judah's side, okay. And so you see that because of what we read directly after that. So, as I had said, Jehosheba, she does something. She's the sister of Ahaziah. She takes this young Joash and hides him. And I looked and I looked and I looked. In I think every single version it said bedroom. Hides him in a bedroom. Okay? So in my mind that means like probably like a king's bedroom, right? But you start to see a little bit later in verse 4 that there's somebody that comes in that kind of makes you think that, well, maybe it might have been in a different place. I tend to think that those are two separate places, but that's my thoughts. That separate place would be the house of the Lord, or the temple, right? So whichever way that you want to take that, I don't think it really matters too much, because otherwise it would say very bluntly for us. So what's the point with this? What has happened? Brad?
I was just going to point out, so it says that he was hidden with his nurse at the temple of the Lord. So,
so yours does say the temple of the Lord.
Yeah.
Okay. In verse 2?
Verse 3.
3.
Yeah.
Really?
He remained hidden with his nurse at the temple of the Lord for 6 years.
Okay, yes. Okay, yes.
Mm-hmm. What does yours say?
So I guess what I was saying is that I'm thinking initially it was in the bedroom, and then
Yeah.
from that point on,
Yeah.
yeah.
It would make sense to me that like, they heard he was coming, the king doesn't live at the temple, the king lives at the palace.
Right.
And the priests live at the temple, right?
Correct.
So
Correct.
you hide him away with
Mhm.
a priest, which is close enough to where you can get there quickly and hide, but, far enough away and under the care of a priest where you would not suspect the priest of being subversive to the king.
And
So-
not only that,
Yeah.
these particular individuals, these families, haven't really been going to the temple, right?
Right.
So in my mind, I'm thinking this is a really good place to hide a king, right? A youngster who would become king. You're on point on that regard, yeah.
And one other thing, so it kind of happens nonchalantly in Kings, but I feel like the Chronicles record
Mm-hmm.
makes more of a deal of this. But
Yes.
all of a sudden you see that when the Edomites attack, and there's like this little alliance between
Yeah.
Israel and Judah,
Right.
and you don't really see much about it, but you see here in your chart why that is. So Jehoshaphat
Mhm.
had his son marry the daughter of
Yep.
Ahab and Jezebel, the kings in the north. So
Right.
there's a little bit of an alliance
Right.
here, and not in a good way, unfortunately. Like you rejoice for unity among God's people, but
Right.
then you see that it's with a daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, I think it's in Chronicles that every time it says Athaliah, it says that wicked woman, and so
Yeah.
so like
Yeah.
you have that influence, so
Yeah.
it's a negative
Right.
thing here, and that's probably why there was a little bit of cooperation between the two kingdoms at this point.
Yeah. I just find it fascinating because once you actually get to know a little bit more and kind of study a little bit more, it's like, well, that makes a little bit more sense now, right? Sometimes I gloss over things, or I have in the past, and you look at the little details and try to help yourself. So this youngster is under the care of, now in verse 4, the priest, Jehoiada, right? And you see Jehoiada take great lengths to protect this youngster, right? And clearly, we've talked about this before, there's God's remnant that is still there, and evidently Jehoiada is one of those remnants. We have not seen a whole lot of discussion about priests for quite a while. It's been about who? Mostly been about the prophets. Those were the individuals that were kind of guiding and directing and keeping it still going, right? Now you see another person in there on God's side. And he really does a good job at looking after. What are some of the things that he does? What does he do after verse 4? All the way up through like verse 11.
He engineers a coup to make him king.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And it's interesting because he's now presented as a king as we go forward. And so the guards stood in verse 11, every man with his weapons in his hands, from the south side of the house to the north side of the house, around the altar and the house, and on the behalf of the king. So they're protecting him. He's got protection all around him. For what purpose? Let's read on. Then he brought out the king's son and put the crown on him and gave him the testimony. And they proclaimed him king. and anointed him. And they clapped their hands and said, "Long live the king!" And you can just see the crowd, because who has been in rule? Who has been in rule for this amount of time? Athaliah, right? The self-governed queen, because everybody's dead. She's not the best of queens by any means. Wicked. Okay? So they're rejoicing in this, even though it's a youngster, right? Which is kind of perplexing to me. You're putting your high hopes in this youngster. Well, there is a lineage. There is a hope, a future for us. So you can kind of see how they're coming about this. I want to go back, though. Look at verse 12. Then they brought out the king's son and put the crown on him and gave him the testimony. What would that be? They gave him the testimony.
Mine says copy of the covenant.
Yeah. And that's where I wanted to go, because some of the versions actually give more reference back to what we talked about in Deuteronomy chapter 17, right? Giving you those principles of how you need to live, how you need to be guided by God. That's important. Jehoiada saw that it was important, and you will start to see that Joash sees that that's important too, as he grows and as he matures. If you are a parent, if you are a grandparent, what do you typically want your kids to do in life? This is an open-ended question. What do you want them to do in life? I'm going to start to pick on people. Rhonda, what did you want Brandy to be in life? What did you want her to do in life? Growing up.
You mean when she was grown?
No, when she's growing up.
Well, I want her to be respectful.
Respectful, okay? Lori, what did you want your sons to be when they were growing up?
Good and good to people.
Good and good to people, okay? Mike.
To live a successful life, but always never forget who they were growing up.
Okay.
They can be true to that.
Okay. Do you want your kids to get in trouble? Typically. Typically.
This is a trick question.
Typically, no. Typically, we want them to do what's right. Even if we make bad choices, even if we've not had the best upbringing, there's just kind of an inheritancy that most of the time we want them to do what's right. Now, if you've been in a family lineage that has had corruption and lots of slaughter and death and mayhem and thievery, and that kind of gets slided in a totally different way, right? But I would say the majority of people want their kids to come up in a proper way, right? And so we do our best to provide that. We try to provide an environment that is that. That is what we see here. That is what we see. And it's even more important because you have a leader, a future leader, that they want that to be. So, in my opinion, this is a very pivotal chapter for God's people, because you're starting to see now wiping of the house previously, and now you're starting to see, okay, God might actually have some root here in the ability to move forward with his people. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, but there's hope. There's a whole lot more ability for that to occur. Any thoughts or questions? Fui.
What I would like my children to be is, first of all, to have the fear of God in them,
Yeah.
And to know in the world that there's going to be a lot of challenges,
Oh, yeah.
and they should pray to God to direct them and guide them.
Yeah.
towards-
Yeah. You want them to fear God. You want them to understand there's going to be challenges in life. It's not going to be all a bed of roses. But you want them to respect God and to go to Him, right? That's what we try and strive to do. Good points there. All right, what do we start to see then, starting in verse 13?
Why notices?
She starts to hear the rumbling, right? Okay? And as she gets to understanding what's going on, right before we get into verse 15, what does she say? Treason! Treason! Right? I know what you're doing. It's too late. It's too late. And sometimes I find that it's interesting how God allows things to occur. And there's almost a sense of humor in this instance, even, in my opinion. Because what happens soon after that? Jehoiada, the priest, commands the captains who were set over the army, bring her out before the ranks and put her to death with the sword, anyone who follows her. So, again, there's protection, but take her. But he didn't want her to be killed where? Where they were, in the temple, right? Needs to be outside. Put her to death at the end of verse 16. What then happens? Jehoiada makes something happen. What does he do? Going back to what kind of Fumi said for children. Michaela.
It made me think of Marie Antoinette, actually, too, because later in history, in the 17th century, you see Marie Antoinette do the exact same thing.
Okay, yeah.
They'll let them be king, and then they all killed her at the end.
Yup.
It's kind of funny that you just see that again.
Uh-huh. Nothing new under the sun, is there? Right. You know, we try to learn from the past, but we oftentimes repeat the past, don't we? Unfortunately. So, with this, Jehoiada makes a covenant with the Lord. And what does he say? Not just with the Lord, with the king and the people, that they should be the Lord's people. And between the king and the people. So there's a binding that he wants to occur. And that's important. It's really important. This is really kind of a pivotal point for them. Because then all the people of the land went to the house of Baal and they worship Baal, right? Wow. You would have thought that that would have been that inclination that they would have still gone that route. Back to John's point. If we don't get rid of what we've had in the past and replace it, we're just going to go back to the past. They've gotten rid of, and now they're devoted. They're gonna change ways. That's big. That's hard. But if you have a group of people to do it, it's a lot easier than if you're doing it by yourself, isn't it? Brad.
It's kind of this reminder of the remnant principle that God observes, and that is like there's always a group of people that are ardently, fervently serving the Lord, and in this case it was this Jehoshaphat and Jehoiada that they are faithful priests. They know, like lots of people know what the king is doing. It's just evil and abhorrent to God. But they're kind of powerless against it. And here they come up with this plan to try and get the people back on track with the Lord to destroy the prophets of Baal and the idol worship.
Yep.
And to renew their covenant with God and go back to worshiping Him. And it's just interesting, like they could have just gone in and killed Athaliah, right? Like
Yeah.
it seems like everybody,
Yeah.
like all the priests at least realize she is wicked. So what are we going to do? Well, we have to have another king that she rebels against, and then we can kill her,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So really quickly, we're going to anoint a king, and when she comes in to rebel against the rightful king, then we can legally kill her. So that's their plan, and that's what they do. And it's just interesting that this little priestess or the
Yeah.
sister of the wife of a priest,
Right.
is kind of put forward as like the Elijah and Elisha. Now it's Jehoiada and Jehoshaphat that are leading the people back to the Lord.
And I don't know if it was just me, but when I read this again, it made me think of Moses, and making me think of that situation and how he was hid and how he was taken in by the king's family, right? His daughter, and was raised in the king's house. Not everything's aligned the same, but some similarities there. Go ahead, Jason.
One quick thing I noticed there, we've been kind of skirting around the thought, but the fact that it was the people that went in and tore down the house of Baal.
Yes.
Whereas I feel like in the past, like in my mind, the way it goes is like with Jehu, it's Jehu and his ensemble
Right.
tearing it down, and
Right.
the people go right back to that.
Right.
Whereas this, there's like some sort of glimmer of hope where it's like, no, the people retake.
They actually take that action.
And they took the initiative to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's get going some more because we haven't even touched 12 yet. I don't know if you noticed that. So, we see importance again. This is where I see Jehoash in some versions. Some versions still remain with Joash. I'm going to stay with Joash because it's easier for my mind. So Joash, you see, did in verse 2 what is right in the eyes of the Lord all his days because Jehoiada the priest instructed him. Nevertheless, the high places were not taken away. The people continued to sacrifice and make offerings on the high places. So we see that as a remnant of the past. We've seen all the way back to Jeroboam happen in his day as well. What I wanted us to really talk about in chapter 12 is the approach that Joash is trying to have the priests take. All the money of the holy things that is brought into the house of the Lord, the money of which each man is assessed, the money from the assessment of the persons, and the money that a man's heart prompts him to bring into the house of the Lord, let the priest take each for his honor or donor, and let them repair the house wherever any need of repairs is discovered. So this is kind of important because we haven't had any discussion about the temple for a long time. And finally, we have somebody that recognizes the value of this thing that David and then eventually Solomon puts in place. God's house, where God's people can be. So he recognizes how valuable this needs to be to them. And that, to me, is important because he's recognizing a greater sense as he's maturing of, we need to take care of this place, right? Doesn't mean that it has to be all glitz and all glory, but we need to take care of how we represent God's house. And he continues on to talk about the money and how that's supposed to be taken care of. and the various things. Any last thoughts for this particular chapter? Because we didn't really get into it as much as I really wanted to. Joash's regard for God is definitely highlighted in these two chapters, and as he moves forward. The temple ends up becoming a place of protection and a place of refuge. Now, again, we can go there for that. In the past, it hasn't been that way. And now we start to see, because of his desire for that place, now we can have reverence for God in that place again. All right. Thank you, everybody. We're going to try to go on to chapter 13, 14 next Wednesday, or this coming Wednesday.